Hello, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the History in the Bible podcast. All the history, in all the books, in all the Bibles. Episode 1.30 Eli and Samuel, Last of the Judges. In the last episode, I discussed the geopolitics of the world into which the United Kingdom of the Hebrews was born, and the biblical sources we have for the period, the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. If you ever get confused about dates and geography, I have some great maps and charts on my website, www.historyinthebible.com. In the next episodes, I'll present a critical history of the century of the United Kingdom from Saul to Solomon, as told by the only source we have, the Bible. With that done, I'll discuss what modern archaeology has to say about that history. The Bible's story of the monarchy opens in the book of Samuel. No book apart from Genesis has such a panoply of characters, portrayed with such a depth of characterization. Here we find the doddering priest Eli, symbol of all that is wrong with the Israelites before the monarchy. Here we find Hannah, the barren woman who gives birth to a great man of God, Samuel. Here we find Saul, the tragically flawed first king. His successor David, who begins as a romantic hero and ends as a morally compromised dupe. The book is a tale of wars and mutinies, of family discord, rebellious sons, duplicitous generals and conniving servants, of murder and mayhem. Decapitation is the preferred method of death. King Saul, Saul's son Ishbosheth, David's son Absalom, the rebel Sheba, the king of the Amalekites. Samuel is the first book in the Bible where our two great sources, the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, really diverge. The Septuagint is shorter and more coherent than the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text of Samuel is clearly riddled with scribal errors, from incoherent grammar to transposed letters in words. We find duplications like this. Quote, 2 Samuel 6:3. They loaded the ark of God onto a new cart and conveyed it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, guided the new cart. They conveyed it from Abinadab's house on the hill, Uzzah walking alongside the ark of God, and Ahio walking in front of the ark. End quote. We find omissions. The Masoretic text has, quote, 1 Samuel 13:15. And Samuel arose and set out from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. End quote. The Septuagint has, quote, 1 Samuel 13:15. And Samuel arose and set out from Gilgal and went on his way. But the rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the soldiers. Then they came from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. End quote. The rabbinical attitude is nothing to see here. The rabbis are committed to the perfection of the Masoretic text and regard the problems in Samuel not as challenges to the textual tradition, but as challenges to their intellectual interpretative skills. The rabbis end up twisted into pretzels, but that is what they are paid for. The Dead Sea Scrolls have thrown light on these discrepancies. One scroll especially has been illuminating, a scroll with the unlovely name of 4Q Sam A. This shorthand means it was found in Qumran's Cave 4, and that there are scrolls B, C, D, and so on about Samuel. The fragile fragments date to late Hellenistic times, contemporary with the Septuagint. Over 100 times, the scroll fails to agree with any tradition. But when we can compare it against the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, it usually follows the Septuagint. Those parts of the books of Chronicles that parallel Samuel also follow 4Q Sam A, rather than the Masoretic text. The 31 chapters of the first book of Samuel recount the lamentable state of Israel's body politic and religion under the priest Eli, and his sons. They describe the coming of the prophet-judge Samuel, the rise and fall of the first king of Israel, Saul, and the triumph of the future King David. At least 5 different stories are interwoven. The first describes Samuel as the rightful successor to the ineffective priest Eli of the city of Nob, guardian of the ark at Shiloh. A second recounts Samuel's adventures. A third describes the travels of the ark from its capture by the Philistines back into the safety of the Israelites. The fourth is a cycle of stories about Saul. The fifth is the adventures of the young David. They all seem to have been mashed together in an attempt to create a coherent narrative. Unfortunately, the editor blew it. 1 Samuel begins with yet another story of a barren wife resenting her fertile sister wife. The book introduces us to Eli, priest at Shiloh and guardian of the ark. The Bible repeatedly describes polygyny, one man with many wives, as perfectly acceptable. It has a few small verses decrying homosexuality. When some describe homosexuality as against God's law, surely they must also accept that polygyny is mandated by God's law. I'd like to thank American listener Warren Jeffs for raising that point. Long quote. 1 Samuel 1:1. There was a man whose name was Elkanah. He had 2 wives, but Hannah, Grace, was childless. This man used to go up from his town every year to worship and to offer sacrifice to Yahweh of the forces on high at Shiloh. The 2 sons of Eli were priests of Yahweh there. One such day, Elkanah offered a sacrifice. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. The priest Eli was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the temple of Yahweh. In her wretchedness, she prayed to Yahweh, weeping all the while. And she made this vow, O Yahweh of the forces on high, if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to Yahweh for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. As she kept praying before Yahweh, Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Sober up. And Hannah replied, Oh no, my lord, I am a very unhappy woman. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink. Then go in peace, said Eli, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. End quote. There's a lot to discuss here. Hannah and her husband have travelled to Shiloh, in the territory of the tribe of Ephraim. We have our first look at the priest Eli. If first impressions count, he is already on the back foot. Eli is well-meaning but clueless. He mistakes Hannah's heartfelt prayers for drunkenness. Hannah conceives and dedicates her son to the priests. Quote, Hannah conceived, and at the turn of the year bore a son. She named him Samuel, Shemuel, meaning, I asked El for him. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with 3 bulls. And though the boy was still very young, she brought him to the house of Yahweh at Shiloh. After slaughtering the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. She said, Please, my lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you and prayed to Yahweh. It was this boy I prayed for, and Yahweh has granted me what I asked of him. I, in turn, hereby lend him to Yahweh. For as long as he lives, he is lent to Yahweh." End quote. That name, Samuel. The author's explanation just doesn't make sense. I'd like to thank listener Amir for clarifying the Hebrew and suggesting a good English analogy. Samuel is a typical theophoric name, one that includes the name of God, in this case El or Ale. The first part of the name could be derived from the noun Shem, name, or the verb Shema, hear. Taken together, Samuel's name could be explained as either name of El or El has heard. It certainly can't be interpreted the way that Hannah does, as I asked El for him. Imagine if she had said, I named him Ashbourne, because he was born under an oak tree. It just doesn't work. However, Hannah's explanation perfectly fits the name of King Saul, Shaul. His name is built from the roots She'elah, to ask, and God's name, El. Hannah's explanation fits Saul's name, not Samuel's. Most scholars believe that the story of Hannah was once told of Saul, but later transferred to the prophet Samuel. Let's conclude with a little observation. I've taken the phrase Yahweh of the forces on high from the Shocken Bible. This is its first occurrence in the Bible. In the King James Version and the New American Bible, it is translated as Lord of Hosts. In Hebrew, it is Yahweh Sebaoth, Yahweh of the armies. Samuel enters into Eli's service as a young man. Eli's house is not a happy one, for his sons are venal priests. We are plunged into the moral decay of the world of the last judges. The sons commit many crimes. They have sex with the hired help at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Worst of all is their mishandling of the sacrifices. Here is what happened in the good old days. Quote, 1 Samuel 2:13. This is how the priests used to deal with the people. When anyone brought a sacrifice, the priest's boy would come along with a 3-pronged fork while the meat was boiling, and he would thrust it into the cauldron, and whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take away. End quote. Here is how Eli's sons perverted that by demanding a roast. Quote, 1 Samuel 2:12. Now Eli's sons were scoundrels. They paid no heed to Yahweh. But now, even before the suet was turned into smoke, the priest's boy would say to the man who was sacrificing, hand over some meat to roast for the priest, for he won't accept boiled meat from you, only raw. And if the man said to him, let them first turn the suet into smoke, and then take as much as you want, he would reply, no, hand it over at once, or I'll take it by force. The sin of the young men against Yahweh was very great, for the men treated Yahweh's offerings impiously. End quote. Speaking through an unnamed man of God, the Lord tells Eli that his 2 sons will die on the same day, that he will take the priesthood from his hands and pass it to some other house. If it is all bad news for Eli, it is all good news for Samuel. Long quote. 1 Samuel 3:10. Yahweh came and stood in the tent of meeting, and he called Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, Speak, for your servant is listening. Yahweh said to Samuel, I am going to do in Israel such a thing that both ears of anyone who hears about it will tingle. In that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I spoke concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I sentence his house to endless punishment for the iniquity he knew about. Samuel lay there until morning, and he opened the doors of the house of Yahweh. Samuel was afraid to report the vision to Eli. But Eli summoned Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he answered, "Here." And Eli asked, "What did he say to you? Keep nothing from me. Thus and more may God do to you if you keep from me a single word of all that he said to you." Samuel then told him everything, withholding nothing from him. And Eli said, "He is Yahweh. He will do what he deems right." Samuel grew up, and Yahweh was with him. He did not leave any of Samuel's predictions unfulfilled. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was trustworthy as a prophet of Yahweh. End quote. Usually, when a prophet receives a direct call from God, the two have a tense conversation, with the prophet protesting his inadequacy. But this time, Samuel accepts his commission with alacrity. Samuel the prophet then disappears for 3 chapters, while his book presents the first part of what is known as the Ark narrative, or the Ark cycle. The Philistines defeat the Israelites in battle near the town of Ebenezer. The people believe they can win a rematch if Eli's sons lead the ark they guard before them. The result of this second battle is brought to Eli. Quote, 1 Samuel 4:15. Now Eli was 98 years old. His eyes were fixed in a blind stare. The man said to Eli, "I am the one who came from the battlefield." Eli asked, "What happened, my son?" The bearer of the news replied, "Israel fled before the Philistines, and the troops also suffered a great slaughter. Your 2 sons are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off the seat beside the gate, broke his neck and died, for he was an old man and heavy. He had been a chieftain of Israel for 40 years. End quote. We see the downfall of an aged leader who lacks vision, whose office weighed him down, and who cannot survive the loss of his most sacred charge, the ark. The Philistines jubilantly cart the sacred artifact to Ashdod, one of their 5 great cities. Ashdod is today one of Israel's main ports, 50 kilometers west of Jerusalem. Shortly after, the Philistines are shocked to find the statue of their god Dagon toppled to the ground. More personally, the city is inflicted with an outbreak of hemorrhoids. Yes, hemorrhoids. The Philistines conduct a game of pass the parcel with their fellow city-states, all of whom suffer the same affliction. After 7 months of travail, the Philistines have had enough. Quote, 1 Samuel 6:2. Then the Philistines summoned the priests and the diviners and asked, "What shall we do about the ark of Yahweh?" They answered, "If you are going to send the ark of the God of Israel away, do not send it away without anything. You must also pay an indemnity to him. Then you will be healed, and he will make himself known to you. Otherwise his hand will not turn away from you." They asked, "What is the indemnity that we should pay to him?" They answered, 5 golden hemorrhoids and 5 golden mice, corresponding to the number of lords of the Philistines. For the same plague struck all of you and your lords. End quote. You heard it right. 5 golden hemorrhoids and 5 golden mice. Did Adam Sandler write this part of the Bible? The Philistines then invent driverless transportation, 3,000 years before Google. They gingerly place the ark on its own bovine-propelled cart. The cart trundles to the Israelite town of Beth Shemesh. The ark is no happier there. Quote, 1 Samuel 6:19. The Lord struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck down 70 men, 50,000 men. The people mourned, for he had inflicted a great slaughter upon the population." End quote. That number, 70 men, 50,000 men, is just as ungrammatical and ungainly in Hebrew as it is in English. In both languages, it would be 50,000 and 70 men. That number would be greater than the entire population of the whole region. This is a typical example of the many scribal problems in the book of Samuel. Perhaps the best way out of this particular difficulty is to follow the Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus, who quotes the number 70 men in his book The Antiquities of the Jews. The chastened people of Beth Shemesh send the ark to the town of Kiriath Jearim, a town on the border between Judah and Benjamin, 15 kilometres west of Jerusalem. It will lodge there until the time of David. After 3 chapters, with Samuel nowhere to be seen, the prophet pops back into the narrative in chapter 7 as if he'd never been away. He convinces the Hebrews to ditch their foreign idols. They vanquish the Philistines at the town of Ebenezer, the same place that the Hebrews had been defeated when led by Eli's sons. The book of Samuel is full of these doublets, where the same incidents appear several times, attributed to different people. After the battle, Samuel is described as judging Israel for many years. The other judges led armies into battle, said almost nothing about God, and did very little judging. Samuel leads no armies, exhorts Israel to love and fear God, and does quite a lot of judging. In another doublet, typical of the book, Samuel has 2 no-good sons, just like his predecessor Eli. In exasperation at yet another bunch of dodgy, worthless leaders, the people demand a king. Reflecting the ambiguity towards the monarchy that percolates throughout the entire Deuteronomistic history, Samuel opposes the whole idea. Quote, 1 Samuel 8:13. "The king will take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will seize your choice fields, vineyards, and olive groves, and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 part of your grain and vintage, and give it to his eunuchs and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves, your choice young men, and your asses, and put them to work for him. He will take 1/10 part of your flocks, and you shall become his slaves. The day will come when you cry out because of the king whom you yourselves have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you on that day." But the people would not listen to Samuel's warning. "No," they said, "we must have a king over us, that we may be like all the other nations. Let our king rule over us, and go out at our head and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he reported it to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed their demands and appoint a king for them." End quote. Samuel's words are the ominous backdrop out of which the monarchy is to emerge. Many cultures stress from the outset a new king's military exploits and charisma, choosing to build a monarch on a firm popular foundation. In the book of Samuel, a thundercloud of misgiving is sounded before the kingship actually happens. Samuel goes looking for a king and will eventually find Saul, first king of all the 12 tribes, first king of the united monarchy, at least according to the story. We are now at chapter 9 of 1 Samuel. From chapter 16, the book loses interest in Saul to take up David's rise to power. Samuel, Saul, and Saul's relatives will become background characters in their own story. In the next episode of the History in the Bible, I present the tragedy of the ill-fated King Saul. I'll see you then.